Hello YouTube, it's C in Maritime History here, back again with another video, and tonight I am having a video on the SS Andrea Doria, which its sinking began the end for transatlantic crossings. Andrea Doria had a length of 697 feet, a beam of 90 feet, and a gross registered tons of 29,100 feet. No, not feet, tons. The propulsion system consisted of steam turbines attached to twin propellers, enabling the ship to achieve a surface speed of 23 knots, or around 43 kilometers per hour, with a top speed of 26 knots or 48 kilometers per hour. Andrea Doria was not the fastest vessel or the largest of its time. These went to Queen Elizabeth, Cunard's Giant, and the SS United States, who I believe top speed is secret. Instead, the Italian architect Minoletti designed Andrea Doria for luxury. Because it actually sailed the southern Atlantic routes, not northern Atlantic routes, Andrea Doria was the first ship to feature 3 outdoor swimming pools, one for each class, first cabin, and tourist. When fully booked, the ship was capable of accommodating 1,241 passengers in 3 different classes, 218 first, 320 in second, and 703 in tourist. As was a rule aboard transatlantic passenger liners, each passenger class was extremely segregated to specific parts of the ship. First class accommodations are located in the middle of the ship on the upper decks. Cabin accommodations were located behind first class, and tourist class accommodations were divided between the bow and stern ends. This is the stern, in case you don't know naval terminology, and were connected by corridors that ran the full length of the ship. Each class had its own separate dining room, lounges, and social halls, designated areas of open deck space and enclosed promenades. As you can see here, here is some large deck space that passengers are looking off of. And then down here, this would be considered an open promenade area, as it is not a closed window. This would be a, I think that's closed, I'm not sure. But if what I see there are windows, that would be an enclosed promenade, but that's too far away in the picture to tell. And even their own swimming pools with verandas. In addition, 563 crew members are charged of operating and maintaining the ship. Over $1 million were spent on artwork and decoration of the cabins and public rooms, including a life-size statue of the ship's namesake, Admiral Andrea Doria. Andrea Doria was divided into 11 watertight compartments, and 2 of these could be filled with water without endangering the ship's safety. She also carried enough lifeboats to accommodate all passengers and crew on board. She had a total of 16 steel lifeboats, 8 positioned on both sides of the ship, of 3 different designs. There were 2 58-person boats for emergency use, 2 70-person motorboats with inboard radio transmitters, and 12 146 hand-propelled standard boats, or boats of oars. Furthermore, the ship was equipped with the latest early warning radar. However, despite its technological advantages, the ship had serious flaws relating to its seaworthiness and safety. Confirming precautions derived from model testing during the design phase, as most ocean liners are designed through models, the ship developed a huge list when hit by any significant force, as would be proven later on. This was especially apparent during its maiden voyage, when Andrea Doria listed 28 degrees after being hit by a large wave off Nantucket. The ship's tendency to list was accentuated when the fuel tanks were extremely empty. Not extremely, but almost empty, which would happen at its final voyage. The stability issue became a focus of the investigation after the sinking, as it was a factor in both the capsizing and the crew's inability to lower the port side boats, which would be over here. The bulkheads of the watertight compartments extended only up to the top of a deck, and a list greater than 20 degrees allowed water from a flooded watertight compartment to pass over its top into adjacent compartments. In addition, the design parameters led to lowering of the lifeboats at a maximum 15-degree list. I believe when she sank, the degrees was 26-degree list. And beyond this limit, up to half of the boats could not be deployed. This is her under construction in June 1951. And near the end of World War II, Italy had lost half its merchant fleet to wartime destruction, like Rex and Conte de Savoia from earlier in the series. The losses include bombing of Rex, like I just said, and the country was struggling with a collapsed economy because of the war. To show the world that the country had recovered from the war and to re-establish its pride, the Italian line commissioned 2 new vessels of similar design in the early 1950s. The first was to be named Andrea Doria after the 16th century Genoese admiral, and the second vessel, which was launched in 1953, was to be named Cristoforo Colombo after explorer Christopher Columbus. They were intended to enter use on the Italian line's service between Genoa and New York, which was commonly advertised as the sunny southern route, alongside Saturnia, Vulcania, which were very old at this point in time for an ocean liner, and Conte Biancamano. Like I said in previous videos, not all Italian line ships are going to have a video, just the ones I believe are important. But if you guys would like to send video suggestions, I'm taking those. I will always take video suggestions, so just send them in. And we'll come back to this if you want, which were among the handful of Italian liners to survive the war. However, as popular as these vessels would turn out to be, all 3 were more than 2 decades old and had somewhat slower service speed. Thus, it was the line's intention to use the new ships to establish a new express service in New York City, while the 3 older liners followed a route that meandered throughout the Mediterranean with additional stops at ports including the Azores, Lisbon, Portugal, Barcelona, and Palermo. The 2 new faster ships would make going 3 ports of call between Genoa and New York, at Cannes, Naples, and Strait of Gibraltar. Construction of Andrea Doria started as yard number 918 at Insaldo shipyard in Genoa, as you can see her here in this picture. On February 9, 1950, the ship's keel was laid on the number 1 slipway, and on June 16, 1951, Andrea Doria was launched. During the ceremony, the ship's hull was blessed by the Cardinal Archbishop of Genoa, Giuseppe Siri, and christened by Mrs. Giuseppina Saragat, wife of the former minister of the Merchant Marine Giuseppe Saragat. Initially, she had been scheduled to depart Genoa on her maiden voyage on December 14, 1952, but amid reports of machinery problems during sea trials, the departure was delayed to January 14, 1953. Following the Italian line's advertised route, she collected 794 passengers in total, before heading into the open Atlantic from New York City. During the ship's maiden voyage, she encountered heavy storms on the final approach to New York City, listing a full 28 degrees. Nevertheless, Andrea Doria completed her maiden voyage on January 23rd, only a few minutes behind schedule, and received a welcoming delegation that included the New York mayor, Vincent R. Impellitteri. I think I pronounced that right. I could be wrong. I hope I did. This is a painting that is in one of my books that I have here at my house. It's by Ken Marshall, the famous ocean liner painter. And it depicts the Andrea Doria during her sinking. And it's a very nice painting in total. I had to crop it a little bit to get it to fit in the PowerPoint slides, but it is a very nice painting, and you see 3/4 of it here. The 51st westbound crossing of Andrea Doria to New York City began as a typical run on the North Atlantic. Her most recent eastbound crossing from New York had concluded on July 14th, and after a 3-day turnaround, the ship was prepared to make another trek across the Atlantic, which was scheduled to begin from Genoa on July 17th, which was a Tuesday. On this run, she was booked to roughly 90% of her total passenger capacity, with 1,134 passengers traveling aboard her. On the morning of July 17th, boarding at the pier at Genoa began at 8 a.m., as Andrea Doria took on her first batch of passengers. In all, 277 passengers embarked at Genoa. Among those boarding in first class were Hungarian ballet dancers Istvan Rybovsky and Nora Kovac, who had defected from the Soviet bloc to the United States just 3 years earlier. Andrea Doria departed Genoa at 11 a.m. on the first leg of her journey. Her first port of call was at Cannes on the French Riviera, where she arrived in mid-afternoon that same day. Only a handful of passengers boarded there, 48 in all. Among them was one of her most famous passengers, Hollywood actress Ruth Roman, who was traveling with her 3-year-old son Richard. The famous songwriter Mike Stoller was aboard as well. Unbeknownst to him, Elvis Presley was enjoying his first big hit song with him and Lieber's Heartbreak Hotel during this historic sailing. From Cannes, Andrea Doria then proceeded 400 nautical miles to the southeast of Naples, where she arrived later the following morning to take on most of her passengers. A total of 744 came on board at Naples, another 85 in first class, 161 in cabin class, and 498 in tourist class. Most in tourist class were emigrants from impoverished regions of southern Italy on their way to new lives in America. She departed Naples just after 6 p.m., making her final port of call 2 days later while dropping anchor off Gibraltar. After collecting her final 65 passengers, she proceeded on the open Atlantic for New York City. On Wednesday, July the 25th, just before noon, Stockholm, a passenger liner of the Swedish-American Line, departed New York Harbor on her 103rd eastbound crossing across the Atlantic to her home port of Gothenburg, Sweden. At 12,165 tons and 525 feet in length, roughly half the size of Andrea Doria, Stockholm was the smallest passenger liner on the North Atlantic run during the 1950s. Completed in 1948, Stockholm was a much more practical design than Andrea Doria. Originally built to accommodate only 395 passengers in 2 classes, Stockholm was designed more for comfort than the luxury and opulence found aboard Andrea Doria. Because the Swedish-American Line was aware that the age of transatlantic passenger travel was coming to an end, with a rapid growth of air travel. Excuse me. My throat tickled. Okay, here we go. However, did they not envision the massive surge in tourism that happened during the 1950s? As a result, the line withdrew Stockholm from service in 1953 for an overhaul that included, in addition to its superstructure, to provide space for accommodations for an additional 153 passengers, increasing her maximum passenger capacity to 548. This proved to be successful, as by 1956, Stockholm regained a worthy reputation on the North Atlantic. Also, because the Stockholm sailed close to the Arctic Ocean, it was designed with a strong ice-breaking bow, which will be a major factor in the survival and the fatal damage to the Andrea Doria, which you can actually see here. There is a very large hole. Then this goes down, quite down to the waterline. At the time of the accident, third officer Johan Ernst Carstens Johansson was on duty on the bridge at the time of the accident. Sorry, I feel like I have to cough again. My throat is just itchy, I don't know why. This was, okay. And, sorry, I misread my script. And he had been up since 6 o'clock that morning supervising baggage loading and passenger boarding in New York City. Stockholm was following her usual course south of the Nantucket lightship at a speed of about 18 knots, with clear skies. Meant to save time, this course nonetheless set the Stockholm 20 miles north of the recommended eastbound course for ships leaving the U.S., meaning that the ship sailed straight into incoming westward traffic. This would be a clear violation of the 1953 North Atlantic Track Agreement, to which the Swedish-American Line was a signatory. Carstens Johansson estimated visibility at 6 nautical miles, or 6.9 rated miles. Stockholm and Andrea Doria were approaching each other head-on in the heavily used shipping corridor. However, the Andrea Doria had been traveling in heavy fog for hours. The captain had reduced speed slightly from 23 to 21.8 knots, activated the ship's fog warning whistle, and closed the watertight doors, all customary precautions while sailing in such conditions. However, the eastbound Stockholm had yet to enter what was apparently the end of a fog bank, and was seemingly unaware of it in the movement of the other ship hidden within the fog. The waters of the North Atlantic south of Nantucket Island are frequently the site of intermittent fog as the cold Labrador Current encounters the Gulf Stream. Sorry. The original inquiry established in the critical minutes before the collision, Andrea Doria gradually steered to its left. Attempting a starboard passing. Well, Stockholm turned about 20 degrees to its right, attempting a port-to-port passing. Sorry, I need water. Sorry about that, guys. My throat needed water. It was really scratchy. Okay, here we go. Andrea Doria and Stockholm fly at almost a 90-degree angle. Stockholm's sharply raked ice-breaking prow pierced Andrea Doria's starboard side, about 1/3 of her length from the bow. As you can see in this picture, there is a gaping hole right about here, under the ship's bridge, which is this larger of windows up here. It penetrated the hull to a depth of nearly 40 feet in the keel. Below the waterline, 5 fuel tanks were torn open and they filled with thousands of tons of seawater. Air was trapped in the 5 empty tanks on the port side, causing them to float more readily, contributing to a severe list. The ship's large fuel tanks were mostly empty at the time of the collision, since the ship was nearing the end of her voyage, worsening the list. The only openings in the bulkheads were on the bottom deck, where watertight doors were installed by the engine crew and could easily be closed in an emergency. Her design specified that if any 2 watertight compartments were breached, she could remain afloat. However, there were more than this. The collision only penetrated 1 of her compartments, but the list allowed water to bypass the compartments, so there was no use on it anyway. Initial radio distress calls were sent out by each ship, and in that manner they learned each other's identities. Soon afterward, the messages were received by numerous radio and Coast Guard stations along the New England coast. The world soon became aware that 2 large ocean liners had collided. Alright, let's see. Sorry, my throat is really scratchy. In the engine room, engineers attempted to pump water out of the flooding starboard tanks, but to no avail. Only a small amount of fuel remained, and the intakes to pump seawater in the port tanks are now high out of the water, making any attempt to level the ship futile. Stockholm, about 30 feet of her bow, had been crushed and torn away. Emptying the freshwater tanks raised the bow to within 4 inches of normal, so she was fine. Need more water. But Stockholm survived. However, as I'm making this video, Andrea Doria certainly did not. Because of the huge list, as you can see, which is happening, when most of the boats had gone, as you can see, there are boats. Passengers, towards the end of the sinking, would go to the stern, and they would launch ropes and Jacob's ladders off the side to get off the sinking ship. Many ships arrived to her aid, such as the freighter Cape Anne, the French lines Ile-de-France, the USS Edward H. Allen, USNS Private William H. Thomas. Excuse me, I choked on my water. And, the Ile-de-France rescued a lot of them. And one of the passengers, I've watched a movie about the testimony. They said it looked like sort of an angel, because you can see under it, they were standing about here, I believe. And remember, this is on an angle. Ile-de-France is out here. So they're looking like they're looking up at it, because Ile-de-France would be here. So they were looking up at the ship instead of looking out at them. After quite a few hours, let's see. About 11 hours, it took Andrea Doria to sink. let's see, 9:45 and 10 the next morning-ish. Oh, sorry, 10 hours after the collision. And the ships ferried all the passengers off, around almost all of them. I believe there were about 30 casualties, 30, 40-ish. I'm really sorry for the coughing, guys. I just thought I'd get this video done no matter what. There was a huge inquiry afterwards because of the loss of passengers. It sure didn't help that all this was caught on ABC News for the companies. Remember correctly from the movie, it's not really specified in the script, I mean, the website I'm using for the script, but I believe most of the blame was placed on Andrea Doria, but a good bit of it was in Stockholm too for traveling right into westbound traffic. But it's still a tragic sinking, despite not a lot of lives lost. I mean, it's no Titanic because everybody showed up. But it's still a tragic story. Hope you guys have a good day. Hope you have enjoyed the video. And, bye.